I still remember the day I pinned on the badge, the weight of it settling onto my chest like a badge of honor. It was a crisp spring morning when I walked through the doors of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office for the first time. The smell of fresh coffee and worn leather wafted through the air, mingling with the hum of fluorescent lights. I felt a sense of pride and trepidation as I gazed up at the iconic logo emblazoned on the wall, a gold star surrounded by a circle, symbolizing the office's commitment to protecting and serving. As I made my way to the orientation room, the sound of keyboards clacking and radios crackling in the background created a sense of urgency, a reminder that this was a place where lives were on the line. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in my stomach. I had dreamed of this moment for years, and now that it was finally here, I was determined to make a difference. I took a seat alongside a dozen other rookies, all of us exchanging nervous glances. Our instructor, a grizzled veteran with a thick mustache and a no-nonsense attitude, introduced himself as Sergeant Thompson. He launched into a PowerPoint presentation outlining the office's history, mission, and values. I listened intently, soaking up every word like a sponge. As he spoke, I couldn't help but think about the long road that had brought me to this moment. The countless hours of training, the sacrifices, the doubts, it all seemed worth it now. I felt a sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than myself. I knew that I still had a lot to learn, but I was ready to put in the work. As Sergeant Thompson concluded his presentation, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. I was ready to hit the ground running, to make a difference in this community, and to wear the badge with pride. I remember the call like it was yesterday. Riverview Homicide crackled over the radio, and my gut told me this one was different. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind that makes you want to take a deep breath and appreciate the beauty of the world. But I knew better. I'd seen enough to know that beauty can be a thin veil for the darkest of deeds. As I pulled up to the scene, a sense of unease settled in. The Riverview neighborhood was usually quiet, the kind of place where folks waved at each other and left their porch lights on. But today, the air was heavy with an unspoken dread. I could feel it in the way the trees seemed to lean in, as if they were trying to listen. I stepped out of my cruiser, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots the only sound breaking the silence. The victim, a young woman in her early 20s, lay on the ground, her eyes frozen in a permanent stare. My training kicked in, and I began to process the scene, taking in every detail. The lack of signs of forced entry or struggle told me this was no random act. This was personal. As I knelt beside the body, a faint scent of lavender caught my attention. It was a subtle detail, but one that stuck with me. I made a mental note to ask about any possible connections to the victim's past. The me would have to confirm, but my instincts told me this was a calculated crime, one meant to send a message. I took a deep breath, my eyes scanning the area, trying to piece together the events leading up to this moment. The silence was oppressive, but I knew I had to stay focused. This was just the beginning of the investigation, and I had a feeling that the truth behind the Riverview homicide would be far more complex than I could have ever imagined. I remember the day like it was yesterday. The sun was high overhead, casting a golden glow over the usually quiet suburban street. I was part of the team that responded to the 911 call, and as I stepped out of my cruiser, I could sense the tension in the air. Neighbors were gathered on their lawns, whispering to each other, their eyes fixed on the house in question. As I approached the residence, I noticed the front door was open, slightly ajar. I exchanged a glance with my partner, and we drew our weapons, moving cautiously inside. The air inside was thick with the smell of sweat and fear. I could hear the sound of sniffling, muffled sobs coming from the living room. That's when I saw her, a young woman, no more than 25, sitting on the couch, her face bruised and swollen. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt a pang of anger. Who could do this to another human being? My training kicked in, and I pushed the emotions aside, focusing on the task at hand. The detectives were already processing the scene, taking photos and collecting evidence. I watched as they carefully bagged a piece of torn fabric, a button from a shirt, and a few strands of hair. The woman's boyfriend, the suspect, was sitting in the kitchen, his wrists cuffed behind his back, his eyes fixed on the floor. I couldn't help but think about the countless times I'd seen this scenario play out. The arguments that escalate, the tempers that flare, the lives that are forever changed. As I stood there, taking it all in, I felt a sense of sadness wash over me. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a snapshot of a relationship gone horribly wrong. The detectives were methodically reconstructing the events of the previous night, piecing together the evidence of the altercation. I knew that in the days to come, we'd uncover more details, more secrets, more lies. But for now, I just stood there, taking it all in, trying to make sense of the senseless. I remember the morning like it was yesterday. The sun was already high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the small town. Our team had been working on this case for weeks, gathering intel and building a solid case against Arnaldo Cintrone and Giselle Santiago Bonilla. They were the masterminds behind a string of burglaries that had left the community shaken. As I stepped out of my cruiser, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots was the only sound that broke the silence. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of my duty belt around my waist. My partner, Rachel, gave me a nod as we approached the small, run-down apartment complex. We had reason to believe our suspects were inside, and we were ready to bring them in. I could feel my heart rate ticking up, but my training kicked in, and I pushed aside any nerves. Rachel took point, her eyes scanning the area as we made our way to the door. I stood to the side, my hand resting on the grip of my firearm, just in case. The knock on the door was loud and firm. The pause that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Then, the door creaked open, and Arnaldo Cintrone's suspicious gaze met mine. I flashed my badge, my voice firm but calm. "Deputy James, Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant for your arrest." Giselle Santiago Bonilla emerged from the shadows, her eyes darting back and forth between Rachel and me. I could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing her options, but it was too late for that. We had them dead to rights. Without incident, we cuffed them and read them their rights. As we led them out of the apartment, the morning sun seemed a little brighter, and the air felt a little cleaner. Justice was being served, and I was proud to be a part of it. I stepped out of my cruiser, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoing through the still morning air. The rural road stretched out before me, a serpentine path winding through the rolling hills. The call had come in just after dawn, a reported burglary at the old Johnson place. I'd been on the force long enough to know that in these parts, a break-in usually meant more than just a smashed window and a missing TV. As I approached the house, I noticed the front door was open, creaking gently in the breeze. I drew my service pistol, a habitual motion that had become second nature over the years. My eyes scanned the perimeter, taking in the overgrown lawn and the rusty farm equipment scattered about. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and fresh-cut grass. I cleared the house, room by room, my footsteps quiet on the creaky floorboards. The signs of a hasty exit were evident: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and a shattered vase on the kitchen floor. I made a mental note to ask the owner about any potential surveillance cameras in the area. Outside, I began to survey the grounds, searching for any signs of forced entry or exit. That's when I spotted it: a faint set of tire tracks leading off the driveway and into the nearby woods. I followed the trail, my boots sinking into the damp soil. The tracks were light, but they told a story. Whoever had done this had been in a hurry, and they'd taken a risk by leaving the main road. As I walked, the trees seemed to close in around me, the only sound the rustling of leaves beneath my feet. I knew every inch of these woods, having grown up just a few miles down the road. I knew that if I kept following this trail, it would eventually lead me to the old logging road. And from there, who knew where? My mind was already racing with possibilities, but I pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. I had a job to do, and that was to follow the trail of clues, no matter where they led. I took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling my lungs, and continued on, my eyes fixed on the path ahead. I stepped out of the patrol car, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots the only sound breaking the silence. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the crime scene. It was a moment of surreal calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. As I surveyed the area, my trained eyes took in every detail: the yellow tape, the scattered evidence markers, the somber faces of the forensic team. My mind replayed the events that had led me here. The frantic 911 call, the rush of adrenaline as I sped to the scene, the sound of screams and wailing sirens still echoing in my ears. It was a scene I'd witnessed countless times, yet each time it still managed to pierce my armor, leaving a fresh scar. I took a deep breath, the smell of gasoline and smoke hanging heavy in the air. My gaze fell upon the charred remains of the vehicle, the twisted metal a grim testament to the violence that had occurred. My thoughts turned to the victims, their families, the lives forever altered by this senseless act. As I began to process the scene, my training kicked in, compartmentalizing my emotions, focusing on the task at hand. I knew every step, every protocol, every procedure. But it was the human element that always caught me off guard. The look of despair in a loved one's eyes, the sound of a child's cries, the stench of death. I felt the weight of my badge, the responsibility to bring justice to those affected. It was a burden I carried with each new case, each new tragedy. I knew that in the days to come, I'd relive this moment, replaying every detail, every decision, every what-if. It was a heavy price to pay, but one I was willing to bear, for the sake of justice, for the sake of those who had been wronged. I stood in the courtroom, my eyes fixed on the defendant as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. The weight of those words hung in the air like a palpable force, and I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. It was a long time coming. I thought back to that fateful night, the one that had started it all. The screams, the blood, the shattered lives. The memories still haunted me, but now, finally, justice had been served. I remembered the countless hours of